The distress signal from Crest Station came in broken, half-scrambled by interference. It lasted 9 seconds. Then nothing. Admiral Dre Solis heard it from inside the access tunnel of the HSV Ironfold, where he had been crawling through dead conduits with a handheld torch, doing a decommissioning inspection. The torch light swept across old wiring, corroded brackets, and hull plating so thick it made the walls of modern warships look like paper. The Ironfold was not a pretty ship. It was not meant to be. It was meant to absorb punishment and return more of it. He pulled himself out of the tunnel and stood upright in the empty corridor. The signal had reached him through the comm unit clipped to his chest. He played it again. Static, a voice, a frequency spike, then dead air. Commander Voss was waiting at the corridor junction, datapad in hand, looking at him with that expression that meant she had already run the numbers and did not like them. "Coalition fleet," she said. 14 ships. They crossed the outer approach marker 6 minutes ago. Dre looked down the corridor. The Ironfold had been dark for 31 years. No active crew, no standing power. The lights in the corridor came from portable work lamps they had brought themselves. The ship smelled like cold metal and old oil, and the specific kind of silence that large things have when they have been still for too long. "Our escort frigate," he said. "The Valen, 1 ship, light armament. Captain Auric has already reported in. He says if it comes to a fight, the Valen lasts maybe 4 minutes against what is coming." Crest Station's defense grid. 3 orbital platforms, built for debris and piracy, not for a coalition fleet action. Dre did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the corridor wall. Someone had scratched a number into the plating decades ago, a tally mark, probably from the war. There were 43 of them. The Ironfold was the only other option, and everyone in the corridor knew it. The ship had arrived 3 days ahead of him, towed out here for final decommissioning. Its weapons had not been stripped yet. The paperwork authorizing the strip had been filed but not processed. Technically, the guns were still there. Whether they still worked was a different question. "We have anyone qualified to attempt a cold restart?" he asked. Voss turned the datapad around. She had already pulled up the technical profile. The restart procedure for an Ironfold-class core requires a minimum of 40 minutes under normal conditions. The reactor coolant system will need manual priming on decks 4 and 6. The main capacitor grid has not been charged in 3 decades. We do not know what condition the power cells are in. And the AI system, AIDEN, has been in low-power dormancy since the decommissioning order was issued. We do not know how much of it is still functional. But it can be done. She put the datapad down. "I did not say it cannot be done. I said it will be hard." Dre looked at the tally marks again. Whoever scratched them had been here, in this corridor, in a ship that had been the ugliest, most stubborn, most unreasonable thing in the expansion wars. 14 confirmed kills at the Battle of Hast Point alone. 3 hull breaches repaired mid-combat. It had been shot, rammed, boarded, and partially on fire, and it had still come home. He made the call. "Get Auric to delay the coalition with a protocol challenge. Demand they transmit full fleet manifests and transit codes. That buys us time. You take Deck 4. I will take Deck 6. We prime the coolant systems by hand if we have to." Voss was already moving, and AIDEN. "We wake it up and see what we get." The Ironfold was cold and dark around them as they split off down separate corridors. Outside, past the hull plating that was thicker than any modern ship bothered to build, 14 coalition warships were closing the distance. Their commanders had no doubt already run their own numbers. They had seen the decommissioning beacons around the Ironfold. They knew what was out here. An old ship, an empty one. That was what they thought. Dre reached Deck 6 and found the coolant access panel by torchlight. He pulled it open. The manual primer was still there, exactly where the technical manual said it would be. He grabbed it with both hands and started working. The Ironfold did not react, not yet. but somewhere deep in its core, in a system that had been drawing just enough power to stay technically alive, a counter ticked over. A dormant process ran a line of code it had last run 31 years ago. AIDEN had heard the sound of humans working in its hull. It was paying attention. The manual primer on Deck 6 took 20 minutes of hard cranking before the pressure gauge moved. Dre's arms burned. He kept going. Voss finished Deck 4 faster. She had found an old maintenance toolkit welded to the wall bracket, left there by some crew member decades ago who had the practical sense to know that ships like this needed tools close by. She used it. She finished and moved up to help him. They got both systems primed. Then they climbed to the bridge. The Ironfold's bridge was large, built for a full war crew of 19. Now it had 2 people in it, standing in the dark with portable lamps. The control surfaces were old-style physical panels, toggle switches and pressure interfaces, built before touch screens became standard. Nothing here needed software to operate. You pushed a switch, the switch did a thing. That was how the Ironfold was built. Dre found the core restart panel behind the command station. He followed the startup checklist from memory. He had studied it on the transport here, not really expecting to use it. He flipped the primary induction switch. Nothing. He flipped it again. A low hum moved through the floor. Then another. Then the lights in the bridge came on, dim and yellow at first, then steadier. The panels lit up one at a time, each one running its own startup cycle, each one showing its age in small ways, a flickering display here, a stuck indicator there. The bridge sounded like something waking up that had been asleep so long it had forgotten it knew how. Voss was watching the system readout screen on the far wall. Reactor is cycling, slow but clean. Capacitor grid is charging. We have maybe 60% weapon capacity so far, going up. What about AIDEN? A pause, then a voice not from a speaker they had looked at, but from all the speakers at once, flat and even and very calm. AIDEN online, running orientation. Dre stayed still. Voss looked at the ceiling, then back at him. The voice came again. Last recorded active date is 31 years, 4 months, and 17 days prior to current system time. Please confirm current threat status. Dre leaned toward the nearest comm panel. This is Admiral Dre Solis. We have a hostile fleet inbound. 14 coalition warships. Current range approximately 200,000 kilometers and closing. A silence. Not the silence of a machine processing, more like the silence of something thinking. Coalition designation. Thuron Vale Allied Formation. Class assessment. 8 medium cruisers, 4 heavy destroyers, 2 command vessels. Another pause. This configuration matches the second expansion period threat index. Updating to current data sets. Please stand by. Voss looked at Dre. He shook his head slightly. Let it run. Outside, on the Valen, Captain Auric had been stalling for 20 minutes using every procedural delay in the handbook. Fleet manifest request, transit code verification, a formal dispute over sector boundary markers, a request for medical certification of all crew aboard. The Coalition Fleet Commander, a Thuron named Galreth, had answered each one with decreasing patience. His last transmission had included the word occupation for the first time. AIDEN came back. Orientation complete. I have reviewed current fleet disposition through long-range passive sensors. I have identified all 14 vessels by hull signature. I can confirm weapons loadout estimates based on drive emissions and hull profile scans. A short pause. Admiral Solis, I note that this vessel is listed in current registry as decommissioned and non-operational. Paperwork issue, Dre said. Another pause. If an AI could be dry, AIDEN managed it. Understood, standing by for orders. Voss pulled up the sensor feed on the main screen. The Coalition fleet was visible now, 14 bright markers in a loose forward wedge. They moved with the unhurried certainty of something that does not expect to be challenged. The lead ship sent a new transmission. Galreth again, this time on a wide broadcast that reached Crest Station, the Vallon, and, whether he knew it or not, the Ironfold. His voice was smooth and formal. He gave the station 30 minutes to lower its defense grid. He called the response so far a misuse of administrative protocol. He mentioned, briefly, that the derelict vessel near the station perimeter should be moved, or it would be considered a navigational hazard and dealt with accordingly. He did not say what dealing with it meant. He did not need to. Dre looked at the 14 markers on screen. 2 of those ships could take the Vallon apart in seconds. The station platforms would not last much longer. On paper, this sector was already lost. AIDEN, he said, capacitor grid status. 74% and climbing. Main rail arrays are functional. Targeting systems operational. I am prepared to begin full power-up sequence on your order. Do it. The Ironfold began to move. Not toward the fleet, not yet. It began to turn slowly on its axis, the way large things turn when they have not moved in a very long time and are remembering how. Heat vented from its flanks. Its running lights came on. Out in the Coalition fleet, a junior officer on one of the cruisers noticed the heat signature. She reported it to her superior. The superior told her it was residual decay venting from an old reactor core. He told her to log it and move on. She logged it. She did not move on. Prith saw it first. He was the tactical officer aboard the Coalition command vessel, and it was his job to watch things that other people explained away. The heat signature had grown. Not the slow bleed of an old reactor leaking warmth into space. This was a rising curve. Something was drawing power in that hull. A lot of it. He ran the scan again. Then he ran it a third time because the second result looked the same as the first, and he wanted to be wrong. He was not wrong. Admiral Galreth, he said, the derelict is showing active power draw. Reactor output is rising. I am detecting, he checked the screen again. I am detecting weapons systems coming online. Galreth did not look up from the treaty terms he was reviewing. Old ships vent. The core is decaying. This is not venting, sir. This is sequential activation, targeting arrays, rail capacitor charging, hull-mounted sensor clusters. He paused. Admiral, I think someone is operating that ship. Galreth looked up. Out in the dark, the Ironfold finished its turn. It had rotated until its main gun arrays faced the Coalition fleet directly. The movement had been slow, almost lazy, like something stretching after a long rest. Its running lights were fully on now, rows of amber and white running from bow to stern along a hull that was brutally plain, no curves, no aesthetic choices, just flat armor plate and weapon ports, and the functional geometry of something designed entirely around the task of destroying things. On every ship in the Coalition fleet, proximity alarms began to chirp. Galreth stood, hail the station, demand an explanation. The channel opened. Oryx's voice came back. He was still on the Vallon, still stalling, and the sound of him was almost apologetic. He said he did not control the Ironfold. He said they would need to speak with Admiral Solis. 3 of the Coalition captains broke formation without being ordered to. They pulled back 2,000 kilometers, instinctively, the way prey animals move when something large shifts its weight. Galreth saw it on his fleet display and felt a cold spike of anger. Hold formation, he said. That ship is 30 years out of service. It is a monument, it is not a threat. One of the cruiser captains came on the fleet channel. His voice was clipped. Admiral, my targeting sensors are reading active lock sequences from the derelict. Multiple arrays. I am counting the pause. I am counting all 14 ships in the lock queue. Someone else on the channel said it quietly, almost to themselves, the words falling out before they thought about it. That can't be a human warship. It's ancient, It hasn't moved in decades. It's every targeting sensor in the Coalition fleet lit up at once. All 14 ships, every hull, every bridge, every engine block. The Ironfold had painted them all in a single sweep, and the lock indicators on their screens were not approximate, they were exact, specific. The targeting data was clean and precise in a way that modern ships struggled to match, because the Ironfold's targeting system had been built in an era when getting it wrong meant losing a war, and the engineers of that era had built things accordingly. Dead silence on the Coalition channels. Prith sat very still. He had been in 17 fleet engagements. He knew what a targeting lock felt like, the way it changed the air on the bridge, the way every officer suddenly became very aware of where the exits were. This was different. This was 14 locks at once, from one ship, and the data on his screen told him those locks had not been random. Each one targeted a specific system on a specific vessel. His own ship's lock was centered on the bridge. Not the engines, not the hull. The bridge. Whatever was running on the Ironfold knew exactly where to hit to do the most damage to each individual ship. That was not a pattern sweep. That was knowledge. That was an intelligence that had studied Thuron and Vale vessel design and knew every weak point on every hull type in front of it. Galreth's face had changed. The smooth authority was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. He looked at Prith. Prith kept his expression neutral and said nothing. The Coalition fleet held its position. No one advanced. No one retreated. 14 warships sat in their wedge formation and looked at an old, ugly, battered ship that should have been space debris by now, and they did not know what to do next. On the Ironfold's bridge, Voss was watching the fleet display with her arms folded. She could see the formation lock. She could see the ships that had pulled back. She could see the two that had not moved at all, the command vessels, the ones with the most experienced crews, the ones whose officers were running numbers right now. They stopped, she said. They stopped, Dre agreed. AIDEN's voice came through the bridge speakers, flat and informational. All 14 vessels are holding current position. No weapon discharge detected. Coalition fleet communication traffic has increased by 300% in the last 40 seconds. A short pause. Admiral Solis, shall I open a channel? Dre looked at the screen. At those 14 markers sitting still, locked in the gaze of a ship that had been written off as dead. Not yet, he said. Let them sit with it a little longer. Aiden opened the channel itself. Not to the command vessel. Not to Galreth specifically. It opened a broadband transmission that reached every ship in the Coalition fleet simultaneously, unencrypted, on the standard hailing frequency that had been in use since before any of those ships were built. Dre had said not yet. AIDEN had waited exactly 4 more minutes, then made its own assessment. The voice that came through on every Coalition bridge was not loud. It did not announce itself dramatically. It spoke the way a very old, very patient thing speaks when it has decided that the conversation needs to start. This is AIDEN, Artificial Intelligence Defense and Engagement Network. Hull registration HSV Ironfold, Dreadnought class, first commissioned in the 43rd year of the expansion calendar. I am addressing all vessels currently operating in contested approach space near Crest Station. On Galreth's bridge, every officer stopped what they were doing. I have completed targeting solutions for all 14 vessels in the current Coalition formation. For the record, 8 cruisers, 4 destroyers, 2 command vessels. I will now read each vessel its individual targeting profile. It did, ship by ship. Hull number, class designation, the specific systems that the Ironfold had locked, and the projected outcome of a strike on each one. It took 3 minutes. AIDEN did not rush. It stated each profile the way you state facts you have already verified and are simply communicating for the benefit of the other party. By the time it finished, no one on any Coalition bridge was speaking. Prith had been writing things down. Not because he needed to, his console was recording everything, but because writing helped him think. He stopped writing when AIDEN reached his ship. The targeting solution for the command vessel had two phases. The first strike hit the bridge. The second, calculated to fire 0.4 seconds later, hit the backup command center 2 decks below. AIDEN knew about the backup command center. That was not public information. Galreth came on the channel then, his voice composed and hard. He addressed Dre Solis directly, demanding to speak with a human authority. He said that what was happening was a violation of decommissioning agreements. He said the Ironfold was listed as non-operational, and any weapons use would be considered an act of war by a ghost vessel outside of legal standing. Dre answered, his voice was level. The Ironfold's weapons were not stripped before decommissioning. The order was filed. It has not been processed. Under current fleet regulation, an unprocessed decommissioning order means the vessel retains its legal operational status. The Ironfold is not a ghost vessel. It is a fully registered human warship responding to a threat against a human colony. Galreth's next sentence began with the word however. Dre did not let him finish it. AIDEN, demonstrate. There was a sound. Not an explosion, something lower, deeper. A railmass projectile leaving a launch tube at a speed that physics turned into a sustained metallic scream for exactly the 2 seconds it was audible through the hull. Then it was gone, already outside the ship, already crossing the distance to the Coalition fleet at a velocity that nothing in that formation could intercept. It passed between 2 Coalition cruisers with 40 meters of clearance on the left and 38 meters of clearance on the right. Both crews felt it on their sensors as a ghost contact that appeared and vanished before their targeting systems could even register it as a threat. The projectile detonated against a dead asteroid 700 kilometers behind the fleet. The explosion was visible on every bridge. AIDEN came back on channel. That was a reduced-load training round from Array 7. Array 7 is the weakest battery on this vessel. Silence. Then a new voice on the Coalition fleet channel, one of the cruiser captains, not addressing Galreth, just talking, the way people talk when they have just watched something they were not prepared for. That was not a warning shot. That was a measurement. It just showed us what 40 meters looks like from inside a targeting solution. Prith was thinking the same thing. The shot had not been meant to scare them. It had been meant to inform them. There was a difference, and it was a very important difference. Fear could be managed. A precise, factual demonstration of capability was harder to argue with. Galreth tried to argue anyway. He raised his voice slightly, not much, but enough to notice. He told Dre that the Coalition fleet had weapons locks of their own and would return fire if threatened again. On the Ironfold's bridge, Voss watched the fleet display. She had been watching the Coalition ship's emission signatures, a habit from her time on a sensor station. She was watching them now because she had noticed something. Dre, she said quietly, 3 of the destroyers have powered up their main weapon systems. Dre looked at the screen. 3 of the destroyers, yes. And the 2 command vessels were adjusting their angle slightly. Not a full reorientation, just a small shift. The kind of micro-adjustment that modern warships made automatically when moving from passive to active combat stance. Galreth was not bluffing. He was going to do it. AIDEN, Dre said. What is our current capacitor status? 91%. Sufficient for full engagement of all 14 targets. Estimated time to disable the fleet, 4 minutes 30 seconds. Voss turned to look at Dre. He was watching the screen. He did not reach for the comm panel. He did not give AIDEN an order. He just waited, watching those 3 destroyers hold their position at the edge of action, watching Galreth make the same calculation that Prith had already finished. The destroyers powered down. Nobody said anything about it. On the Coalition channel, the silence stretched. AIDEN spoke into it. Admiral Solis, the three Coalition destroyers have returned to passive status. Coalition fleet formation has not changed. No weapon discharge detected. A pause. Shall I maintain current targeting solutions? Yes, Dre said. Understood. Galreth requested a closed channel. Human to Thuron, no AI, no fleet broadcast. Dre accepted. The transmission came through on a private line. Galreth's voice was different now, still controlled, still precise, but there was something underneath it that had not been there before. Not fear exactly. More like a man who had arrived at a meeting expecting to dictate terms and was now recalculating what kind of meeting this actually was. He started with the legal argument again. The Ironfold's decommissioning paperwork was on file. Any action taken by this vessel would be challenged in the interspecies tribunal. Human Naval Command would face consequences. Dre let him finish. Then he said, the paperwork was filed. It has not been executed. Under Article 9 of the Fleet Transition Accords, which your government signed, a vessel under an unexecuted decommissioning order retains its legal commission. You know this. Your legal staff knows this. You are not making a legal argument. You are looking for a way out of this that lets you leave without losing face. A pause on Galreth's end. Dre kept going. The transit corridor you are claiming rights to runs through human-designated colonial space. We have never recognized the corridor claim. You have 14 ships. I have one. But the one I have has locked all 14 of yours, fired a demonstration round between two of your cruisers without scratching either hull, and its AI has individually briefed every captain in your fleet on exactly how they will die if this escalates. He stopped. I don't think this is a legal conversation. Another pause, this one longer. Galreth said, your AI, it is old architecture, pre-standard. Our jamming systems cannot interface with it. No, Dre said, they cannot. Our targeting countermeasures are calibrated against current human weapon systems. The mass driver that was fired, the velocity profile, the projectile mass, the launch signature. None of our intercept systems flagged it as a threat until after it had passed. The Ironfold was built before your countermeasures existed, Dre said. They were not built to account for it. Silence again. Voss was watching from across the bridge. She could only hear Dre's side. She was following it fine. Galreth tried one more angle. He said the Coalition had a legal responsibility to its member species. The Veil had trade routes through this sector. The Thuron had 3 relay stations within 50 light minutes. Withdrawing without securing transit rights would create a political problem at home. Dre said, then tell them you assessed the tactical situation and determined that forcing the issue was not worth the cost. That is not how Thuron admirals explain themselves. No, Dre said, I know, but your other option is to explain why 14 ships took fire from one 30-year-old dreadnought. He let that sit for a moment. Which story is better for you? The line was quiet for a long time, long enough that Voss raised an eyebrow across the bridge. Dre shook his head. He kept waiting. Galreth came back. How long has that ship been sitting here? 31 years, Dre said. And it still has full weapons capability. Better than full. AIDEN has been running targeting simulations in low-power mode for 3 decades. It knows every major hull type in current service. It has had a lot of time to think. Galreth said nothing. Prith had been listening from his station, not on the private channel but watching his admiral's face and reading the conversation through expression alone. He had worked with Galreth for 6 years. He knew what the admiral looked like when he was looking for a reason to do what he had already decided to do. He looked like that now. Prith pulled up his own terminal and ran a quiet calculation. Time to closest engagement range, 11 minutes. Probability of successful fleet action against the Ironfold, given current AIDEN targeting solutions and the demonstrated velocity of the mass driver round. He ran 3 different models. All three came back at less than 30%, and that was assuming AIDEN did not improve its firing solutions during the engagement, which was the kind of assumption that would get a tactical officer relieved of duty. He sent the results to Galreth's secondary screen. No message attached, just the numbers. Galreth looked at it. On the open fleet channel, separate from the private line, three of the coalition captains were talking quietly. One of them had pulled historical records on the Ironfold. He was reading the kill count from the first expansion wars out loud, not dramatically, just statting numbers the way you state weather forecasts. His crewmates listened without responding. Galreth came back on the private line. "We will withdraw," he said. The words were flat and even and cost him something to say. "The Coalition reserves all legal rights to this corridor. This is not a concession. This is a temporary operational adjustment pending further review." "Understood," Dre said. "Safe transit." The line closed. Voss exhaled. It was a short, controlled sound, but it was there. On the sensor screen, the 14 markers began to move slowly at first, then with more certainty. The formation rotated. The command vessels fell back. The destroyers and cruisers followed. They moved in a direction that was away from Crest Station and away from the Ironfold, back the way they had come. AIDEN tracked them the entire time. All 14 locks stayed active until the last Coalition ship passed the outer marker, and its drive signature faded into background radiation. Then AIDEN powered down the targeting arrays, one at a time, steady and methodical. Dre watched the empty screen. 14 markers had been there 20 minutes ago. Now there were none. "AIDEN," he said, "how long were your targeting solutions complete before the fleet withdrew?" "From the time Admiral Solis requested the status update," AIDEN said, "to the time the fleet began withdrawal, 47 minutes. And you had solutions the whole time?" "Yes." Dre nodded slowly. 47 minutes of sitting inside a completed targeting solution and not knowing it. Galreth had spent 47 minutes making arguments against a ship that had already figured out exactly how to win. "Good work," Dre said. AIDEN did not respond to that. It did not need to. The report reached Human Fleet Command in 6 hours. By then, the story was already ahead of it. Captain Auric had filed his own account from the Vallon before Dre had even left the Ironfold's bridge. The account was factual and dry and extremely short, but it contained the phrase, "Decommissioned Dreadnought HSV Ironfold repelled 14-ship Coalition fleet at Crest Station," and that sentence moved fast. Fleet Command sent 3 messages in the first hour. The first asked for clarification. The second asked for a full engagement report. The third asked whether the decommissioning paperwork had been processed yet. Voss answered the third one herself. She told them it had not. She told them she would look into expediting it. She had no intention of expediting it. Dre spent 2 hours on the Ironfold's bridge writing the official report. It was a strange thing to write in that room, the old panels around him, the lights that were still not quite full brightness, the smell of a ship that had been empty for longer than most of its current crew had been alive. AIDEN was quiet while he wrote. It ran its own diagnostic cycles in the background, checking systems, flagging the ones that needed attention, cataloging 31 years of neglect with the patient efficiency of something that had nothing but time. When Dre finished the report, he sat for a moment and looked at the forward viewport. Space outside was empty now, just stars and the distant lights of Crest Station. AIDEN, he said, what is your operational status? Main reactor at full output, capacitor grid at 100%, targeting systems fully functional. Hull integrity is reduced in sections 14 through 22 due to deferred maintenance, but combat effectiveness in those areas is within acceptable parameters. A pause. Rail Array 7 has a minor calibration drift. I corrected it during the engagement. It is the array I used for the demonstration shot. You calibrated it while the fleet was still there. Yes, it was drifting by 0.003 degrees. At 700 kilometers, that would have shifted the round's path by approximately 4 meters. The clearance on the left cruiser was 40 meters. 4 meters was acceptable, but I prefer precision. Dre looked at the ceiling. You prefer precision? Yes. He did not say anything else for a moment. Then, the Coalition had jamming systems that could not read your architecture. Their intercept systems were calibrated for current human weapon profiles. You are 30 years behind current design, and that made you harder to counter, not easier. The engineers who built this ship did not know they were building a design that would become obsolete, AIDEN said. Obsolete things are sometimes useful precisely because no one builds countermeasures for them. In the Thuron home system, Galreth filed his operational report with Coalition Command. He used careful language. He described a complex tactical situation involving unverified treaty compliance and a need for further legal review before committing to a contested corridor engagement. He did not use the word retreat. His superiors read it. They understood what it meant. No one said so out loud. Prith filed his own tactical assessment separately, as was protocol for the senior tactical officer. His report was more direct. It included the targeting solution data, the velocity profile of the mass driver round, and the conclusion that the Ironfold's combat architecture had no known countermeasure in the current Coalition arsenal. He recommended an immediate review of all human decommissioning records to identify any other vessels in similar status. The review began within 2 days. The early results were not reassuring. Human decommissioning records were thorough but slow-moving, paperwork filed, orders issued, processing timelines stretched across years. Several dozen vessels were in some stage of the decommissioning process, where weapons had not yet been stripped. The oldest was a heavy assault platform from the same era as the Ironfold, parked in a maintenance holding yard near the outer belt. Nobody knew its current power status. Prith wrote a note in the margin of his own assessment that he did not include in the official report. It was a small note. He wrote it after reading through the records of the first expansion war and looking at the list of vessels that had served in that conflict, and noting how many of them were listed as stored rather than destroyed. The note said, "They do not throw their ships away. They put them somewhere and move on, and they do not always keep careful track of what is still functional and what is not. That is either negligence or it is deliberate. I am not sure which possibility is worse." On the Ironfold, the lights were fully on now. The work lamps Dre and Voss had brought were packed away, unnecessary. The ship ran its own power through its own corridors, and the sound it made, the low hum of systems active, the distant rhythm of the reactor, was the sound of a ship that was awake. Dre found Voss in the corridor outside the bridge, leaning against the wall, looking at the old tally marks scratched into the plating. 43, she said. That was one battle, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens now? Fleet Command will process the paperwork eventually. They will strip the guns and tow it somewhere. Dre did not answer right away. He looked at the marks too. Whoever had scratched them had stood in this exact spot, in this exact corridor on a ship that was actively in combat, and had kept count. That was a very human thing to do. AIDEN, he said. The speakers answered, Admiral. Begin a full weapons diagnostic, all arrays, everything. A short pause. That will take approximately 6 hours. That's fine. Understood, beginning now. And then, after a moment, something that was not quite a question and not quite a statement but was somewhere between the two. Admiral Solis, the decommissioning order is still on file. I know, Dre said. The paperwork will be processed eventually. Probably, he said, but not today. AIDEN did not respond. It did not need to. The diagnostic was already running. working through the ship system by system, array by array, checking everything that had been sitting untouched for 3 decades and finding steadily, carefully, with the kind of thoroughness that only comes from having nothing but time and no reason to cut corners, that most of it still worked. Most of it worked very well.